Hi and welcome. You're listening to Historic Huguenot Street's weekly show on WFNP The Edge, where we discuss New Paltz history and the history of the Hudson Valley. I'm Kaitlin Gallucci, and I'm the Communications Manager at Historic Huguenot Street, which is a nonprofit 10-acre National Historic Landmark District dedicated to preserving historic buildings, artifacts, and manuscripts, and promoting the stories of the Huguenot Street families who founded New Paltz. If you missed our show last week with Huguenot Street's guest experience coordinator, Courtney Russo, you can listen to it anytime on Huguenot Street's SoundCloud and YouTube. Last week, we chatted all about this year's new Haunted Huguenot Street tours. Tickets are available now for this Friday and Saturday and next Friday and Saturday, but a number of tours have already filled, and these tours always sell out. So I encourage you to register as soon as possible, and you can do that at huguenotstreet.org/haunted. Tours begin at 5 p.m. and run every hour on the hour until the final tour at 9 p.m. Every year, our Haunted Huguenot Street tours are different, and this year's bring guests into 4 historic structures while exploring the history of oppression, particularly in the case of oppressed women in the 17th through 19th centuries. To talk a bit more about New Paltz legends and the creative process that helps bring these tours to life, tonight I'm joined by 2 of Huguenot Street's interpreters, also a current SUNY New Paltz Theater student, correct? Mm-hmm. And a recent graduate, right?
Yes.
Amber Neilson and Scott Phillips. Hi, guys.
Hello there, Kaitlin.
Thank you so much for joining me. So first, can you tell us a bit just about what you normally do at Historic Huguenot Street as a guide or an interpreter?
Wreak havoc.
Oh.
Always.
We just kind of we go in and we lead people from house to house, and we talk about the history and also the implications of said history and how we can use it. We all have a different way of going about the tour, so the way that I would do it is very different from how Amber would do it or how Sierra would do it or whoever else, but yeah, it's great. What do you think?
Great.
Totally. I mean, this year we're particularly focusing on different oppressed peoples, including the enslaved on Huguenot Street and Native Americans, specifically the Lenni Lenape tribe. So getting to dive a little bit more into that this year is really exciting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. So last week, Courtney talked a bit about how vital it's been for her to have interpreters with theater experience, like you both have, involved in developing tours like Haunted Huguenot Street. So how have you guys been involved in helping to create this year's tours?
Well, Amber wrote the whole thing herself.
Well,
I thought so. I knew you'd be right to talk to.
that is a bit of an overstatement. I only wrote about half of it, but we all kind of pooled our ideas together.
Right.
So we started off with just having meetings with all the interpreters, especially the theater people, the alumni, and myself, and Sierra. And we just kind of started throwing out ideas. We were reading a lot of different books and articles from across history from the Hudson Valley, because Huguenot Street alone has its own really interesting hauntings and gory kind of stories.
Right.
Macabre. But we didn't want to just limit it to Huguenot Street because there were so many other different areas to explore. So we decided to open it up to the Hudson Valley. And we all kind of just sat around and threw out all these ideas until finally we kind of kept on getting stuck on women and the interesting women that have lived in the area and witch trials and murders and mental illnesses. So we just kind of decided to stick to that and then started kind of making a structure and then started to write the script from there.
Great. Yeah, no, I mean, like I said, last week Courtney talked about how helpful that all of your input has been. So you're both involved in this year's tours.
Yeah.
And last year you were both guides.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously we don't want to spoil what guests are going to see this year, but we can totally talk about the stories that people already saw last year.
Totally.
So can you maybe... What stories do you remember? Do you want to tell us some?
Oh, there's so many fun ones.
Well, there's the whole thing about the woman throwing herself in the well. Everyone loves that.
Yes, that's a memorable one.
Annie
else?
Dubois.
Yeah, is that what her name was?
Yeah, so
Couldn't remember.
Basically the story of that is it was 1931, and Annie Dubois was living in New Paltz for many years, and finally one day she decided to kill herself. And we're not sure exactly which well she threw herself down, but we always say that it's
Probably the other one.
Probably the one that we say it's not.
Yeah. We say, not this one we're standing right next to.
But that's
of
the
course.
creepiest one,
Yeah,
so that's what we
yeah.
say. But we know it happened. So basically, she just one night decided to flee her house, and then she just jumped down, and people wonder why she did it. And
Right.
the best guess that people have is just prior to her killing herself, the love of her life, Hugo Freer, had just died from appendicitis suddenly. So we thought that she was just totally distraught and couldn't go on living. And some people even believed that she was pregnant with this child, but she was 62 when she killed herself.
Right,
so
I
it's
do recall
unlikely.
that.
Yeah, so that's most likely not the case.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, and so this is one of those cases, I mean, where, maybe just influenced by that story and knowing that happened, that, people, of course, get maybe an eerie feeling or feel like they see something or see someone. Something
And
like that.
embellish things.
Oh, of
sort of the
course.
telephone effect.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Right. Like, it's like, that's probably how the story evolved to be, and she was pregnant.
Yeah.
Well, that's the whole story of the Man in Black, the famous story of the Man in Black in New Paltz. That has just it started off from this tiny little incident, and it turned into this huge thing that we can't even figure out where they got all this information from. The Man in Black, the whole idea is that there was this foreign exchange student that went here for a while, like 50 years ago, and one day he went on a rampage and just murdered
Yeah, it was
some
back
people.
in the early 70s. He was an international student who lived here on the SUNY New Paltz campus, actually, and apparently something happened in which he started to assault one of the female co-eds, and then he fled to
A barn.
to a barn somewhere, like a farm. And then he killed the owner of the farm.
His
and-
name was Mr. Grimm.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I can't. Yeah, I know his last name was Grimm. I just read it the other. I don't remember what his first name was.
Mister.
Yeah, Mister was his first name. Yeah. And apparently he killed the guy and took
was
his
sent-
head somewhere.
Something. And then he
Yeah.
was sent to an insane asylum.
And eventually deported. Apparently, but some like to connect to the whole story of this dark figure that walks around with a big black dog and an axe.
Sometimes he has no head.
Sometimes he has no head. I've been hearing a lot of those ghost stories about headless ghosts recently.
I don't know where he got his
Yeah.
dogs from, but sometimes he has one dog, sometimes he has two dogs.
I
But people
see.
just see him walking around, I guess. That's what we've heard.
Yeah.
So it's interesting how all these different stories just kind of bleed into each other sometimes.
Yeah, definitely. Because I feel like I remember hearing probably from Courtney, and it was probably in the research that you read as well, something about also a story about in the fort, are you familiar with this? And a woman, so a woman who was living in the fort when it was like a residence, said that one night when she got up and like went to the bath, this is probably in the past 100 years or 50 years, went into the bathroom and there was a headless woman apparently like standing there. So I just
boy.
thought of that when you mentioned that people talk about this
That's
being
his
headless,
sister.
and it sounds like it keeps they must be related.
Yeah.
I mean,
Exactly.
that's
The
just
resemblance is just so close.
That's
just-
what's in the genealogy.
It's in the water
they
on
die
Huguenot
and then they
Street.
lose
Yeah,
their
it's a
heads.
dominant trait.
Yeah.
The head is the only thing that passed on. The rest of their body's just kind of walking around, running into walls.
Yeah. Walking the dog.
Yeah. Perhaps they were politicians.
Probably.
So, what have some of your favorite stories or interpretations been? I mean, obviously we're talking about Haunted tonight, but
Yeah.
you could tell about anything because obviously you guys are involved in so much at Huguenot Street.
Oh boy.
Yeah, well,
Where
it's
to begin?
interesting. One of my favorites from 2 years ago when I did my first Haunted, I, as one of the guides, told the story of Maria Deo,
Oh yes.
who one day just snapped and killed all of her children. And then
Right.
this year we decided to actually tell that story by reenacting it. So that was always one of my favorites. So unless Courtney spoiled that last week, I'll just not go into it so they can see for themselves.
No, yeah, for sure. No, I think that was a great, yeah, we should for sure mention that. And especially because I feel like that's one of the most well-known ones. Like, I think, people would be excited to get to know that they can get to see an interpretation of
and
that.
Of course,
that
it's one of
story.
those stories where you know what happens, but how we get there is, it's been interesting to guests who have never seen it before. So,
Yeah, definitely.
I also love the story of the death coach. That was one that I told a couple years back.
Oh, yeah. Can you tell us that?
Yeah, sure. That's kind of a general Hudson Valley story. We don't know where it started specifically, but basically there was this old woman who was sitting by her husband's bedside. He was dying, and he kept on saying over and over, "Where is it? When are they coming here?" And she had no idea what he was talking about. Until finally she heard the clip-clop of horses' hooves come up by her house. So she thought that was strange. So she went to the window and she saw this black coach with no horses and no rider, but it was still making that noise.
Wow.
And it pulled up to the house, and she freaked out, of course, because that's crazy. And she looked back and she saw that her husband got out of bed, and he was bedridden for who knows how long, and walks out the door and starts to board the coach. So she runs back and she sees him and he turns back and he waves at her. And then he gets on, and then the coach clip-clops away again without the horses into the darkness.
Wow.
So that's the story.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
Yeah, I think that's really
It's
cool.
fun to wonder where those actually come from.
Yeah.
The one that I just read most recently that I'd never known before, when we were actually trying to figure out what we wanted to put into this year's haunted show, interpretation, whatever you want to call it. The one that I was the most fascinated with was about this, a tax collector or rent collector who walked around New Paltz. This is back in the 1830s. And he was riding a horse, and he was going from door to door, and he was collecting rent or taxes or whatever from people. And apparently he disappeared. And later on, a few weeks later, or maybe months later, they found the bones of his horse still chained around a tree in the forest, and he was nowhere to be found. So,
Oh, wow.
yeah, and apparently the case was opened like 80 years later, so around the turn of the next century. But it's still an unsolved murder, and it happened right here in New Paltz.
Oh, wow,
So
yeah.
just this guy who was going around collecting money. Apparently, it didn't bode too well with the residents, and they decided to do something about it.
Sure, that's possible.
Yeah, but the whole idea of the horse still being chained to the tree after the carrion crows had come in to eat his body.
Right. And just no one coming
ridiculous.
across it.
Oh,
yeah. Interesting. Yeah, there's a lot of mysterious things, and I think that also brings up a great point about with all these stories, pretty much. Well, some of them, of course, we've said, where did that story originate? But with stories like that one, how you said the case was still open, at the turn of the century. It's like this is a perfect example of how most of our, not only just when we give our regular historic tours, but even the haunted tours, so many of these stories are based in, I want to say based in fact, but it's kind of hard to call paranormal stuff fact. But you know what I mean? In that there's research and evidence, at least to back up that someone saw or experienced something.
Right.
We're not just making up a story like, well, what if there was like a ghost, but like
inspired by true
actually
events.
like
What if
hundreds
there
of
was
people
this
saw
ghost?
one. Yeah.
And it just haunted your life. What if that's what happened?
Yeah, exactly. But no,
That's most horror movies.
Yeah, really. Uh-huh.
yeah, you just put a ghost in any situation, right? But we don't have to do that because there's, these police reports and these diaries and all this archival material that tells us
Certainly.
that people have already been having these experiences on the street. Like I remember also from last year's Haunted, and we talked a little bit briefly about this before we came in. So there was that one, and I always just thought it was really neat because the source of it was literally from Abraham Hasbrook's diary in like the 1700s, which just seems it's amazing that, and we still have that, of
I
course.
didn't know they even had diaries back then.
Right. Well, maybe everyone did.
They could write back then?
Right?
Stone and chisel?
Exactly. But so, so Abraham had children, and one of his children was sick with tuberculosis, and she was passing away, and her family was all around her, and she was asking, all of her loved ones to give her a kiss goodbye. Of course, not the best idea because she was very, very ill and highly contagious, but, she was a dying child, of course.
I find it shrewd.
Yeah.
She wanted to take him with her.
Yeah. Possibly, yeah.
How could
maybe.
you blame her,
Exactly. So, and everyone did, of course, or so the story goes, everyone did give her a kiss. And, but her brother, who was also a child, was, he was scared, which is very understandable that he would be, scared in that
Right.
situation. And so he refused, he wasn't comfortable, I guess.
Typical Joey. Joey Hasbrook.
And so then Abraham also writes in his diary about how afterwards Joseph, the boy, is, afraid now to go upstairs because he's like hearing things, and there was something, literally about like the dog, their like pet dog not wanting to enter a certain room and things like that.
He was
and
just like haunted by his lack of closure. Basically,
Yeah.
he couldn't get over the fact that he didn't say goodbye to her.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, right. So of course, the concept was kind of as if, his sister was haunting him for not kissing him goodbye. And just kind of that, like, his guilt, of course, and things like that. But yeah, again, that was just another example of a story that came from, something that did really happen. Obviously, we don't have proof of ghosts or anything like that, but, it is something that happened, and these people actually had this experience on the street.
And people we're drawn psychologically. We're usually drawn to things that are enigmatic like that. So with a story that has sort of doesn't really have an ending, like you said, no closure, kind of thing. That's, I feel like when it comes to that, lends itself so heavily to ghost stories, especially ghost stories that are directly from history like that.
And because
when
it's
you
so
expect,
relatable.
Yeah, it is very relatable.
Right, exactly.
And you have the source material.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
Yeah.
our sisters don't die from tuberculosis usually anymore.
Right.
But that we always have that feeling of regret, and I think that's something that we can get from that story.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's a great point. And like for example, so on, both of you know this because you were giving the tours last year, but how, like, for example, how this year's tour, the theme is more about, the theme is obviously about women and oppressed women, but last year dealt more kind of with that whole, like, question of death and dying.
What comes from it.
Yeah, maybe one of you can describe it a little bit better than I am.
Well, yeah, it was just sort of like kind of the grieving process in a way, and how different factions or different people deal with grief and death in different ways, and how it's usually there's an evolution to it. Whereas sometimes you'll have something like Joseph Hasbrook, for instance, who will be haunted the rest of his life by something that he didn't do, whether or not he ever saw a ghost or not. But then, of course, you have how other people deal with these sorts of things where they do manifest hauntings, whether or not they're real hauntings or if they are just psychological. So then we have something like Gertrude Bogardus there, who supposedly haunts the Deo House. Well, she was a big part of the tour last year as well. And our friend Anika, who's also an alum of SUNY New Paltz, played her pretty magnificently.
Yes.
And so we had a lot of those. I can't remember all of the right off the top of my head. I can't remember all of them. They all dealt with that same sort of idea of what death does to the living.
Spoon River Anthology.
Oh, the Spoon River Anthology.
Exactly, yeah.
And just kind of people's fascination and obsession with death.
Right,
I think over many different periods of time, we have different stories and films and books about people's obsession with the macabre, and just because it's like one of the main things that we'll never know about. until
Right.
we're dead.
It's
Or we won't
It's a
then.
Or we won't.
great mystery. Yeah.
We never will.
It's like the ultimate mystery. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's the ultimate constant as well. It's the only thing that's really truly going to happen to us in
That's
life.
true.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, right now we're going to take a quick break. We'll definitely pick this up afterwards. You're listening to WFNP The Edge. Hi, and welcome back. You're listening to Historic Huguenot Street's weekly program on WFNP The Edge. I'm Kaitlin Gallucci, and I'm joined tonight by two Historic Huguenot Street interpreters, Amber Neilson and Scott Phillips. So I know this is a favorite time of year for a lot of us, and I'm wondering what part of this year's tours that you're both involved in, what part of this year's tour are you most proud of or most excited for guests to see?
The bloody hand.
There is yeah.
It's an essential part.
Yes.
Of the
No,
whole
that's
story.
so true.
Should we go into what the bloody hand is, or do I just leave it at that?
Just leave it.
We'll leave it at that. Everybody, come to Historic Huguenot Street on
There's a
Friday
bloody
night
hand.
and Saturday night. Come see the bloody hand. It's actually the name of our metal band that we started. We were just performing a gig over there in the lawn.
Yeah, no, we can. I mean, you can. Well, you can share as much as you like about the bloody hand.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, the bloody hand is that's giving too much away. But we do have a whole thing about witchcraft that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
That's the one part of the tour I still haven't actually gotten to see, so
What,
I can't even
the
speak
witchcraft
for that.
part.
I
Oh
haven't
yeah.
haven't either.
So the witchcraft thing. Obviously we all know that most specifically women were either hanged or burned at the stake throughout history. After accusation of witchcraft, and usually it was all ridiculous. It had nothing to do with actual sorcery or magic. It just had to do
Right.
with wanting to eradicate them, whether for political reasons or what
They just didn't get their Hogwarts letter, okay?
or they didn't get their Hogwarts letter.
Yeah,
Uh,
they were legit.
Yes. So ultimately, we decided that we were going to have a part of the tour be about that, where they tell stories about witchcraft, and then I actually get to play like a warlock, because there was actually a story in which a man, because they used to throw women into the river, like in Monty Python, they used to like throw them into the water, and if they drowned, that meant that they were not a witch, and
Yeah.
if they didn't drown, that meant that they were a witch, and then they would string them up and kill them
Right.
in some grisly manner,
Really?
either through hanging or through burning.
Fascinating.
I just get confused
reasoning.
because, like, wouldn't they have learned how to swim just from existing? Or I don't understand.
Not always. Not always. So some people, if they weren't good swimmers, obviously would drown, and if they were good swimmers, they wouldn't. However, there was a man, and multiple instances of men who this happened to. They were accused of witchcraft, and they were thrown into the river, and they survived. And then they just kind of, the townspeople or the congregation or whoever was running the trial, just sort of decided that, well, we're just gonna let the guy live. He's a man after all. He probably
Right.
just somehow he just survived. But we're not gonna
Yeah.
we're not going to.
I mean,
abuse
it
him
makes
anymore.
sense for a man to
Yeah,
learn how
yeah.
to
I
swim.
mean, he learned how to swim, but his wife didn't. She's a
woman
witch.
could never learn how to swim unless
Right.
she's a witch.
Absolutely not. So I play this warlock. So that's one part of the tour that's pretty interesting. And obviously all the stories are fun. So
Yeah.
like we're having a good time with it.
Yeah,
For sure.
definitely.
I mean, I'm biased about mine. I had just mentioned it before, the Maria Day
Right,
story.
right.
Where I'm playing Maria. So it's a little dark. We did get to play around the different stage combat techniques. So that was
Oh,
that was really
nice.
fun to do too.
Yeah.
Really small kind of basic things. But we have an alumna. No, she's not an alumna. She goes here right now. Her name is Anya, playing my son actually. So
Oh, that's right.
shout
that's
out to
right.
Anya. She's great.
Yay, Anya.
Yeah, so the Jean Hasbrook house is creepy enough, let alone watching people get murdered in there right in front of your
Right.
eyes. So that's pretty exciting. Plus, we
Yeah.
get to go into the Lefevre house this year, which we hadn't done, at least in the past couple of years, for haunted tours.
That's right. That's actually a great point. People do not typically get to see the inside of the Lefevre
Which
house.
is
And
a
it's the
shame.
best.
It's cool.
It
It's
is so
It's the
amazing.
best house on Historic Huguenot Street.
We never go in there.
Scott's official
Yeah.
declaration.
Yes,
Um,
I have it in writing.
I really like the scene that happens in there. When I was writing that scene, I was doing a lot of research on Victorian era myths and superstitions that go with funerals and all of the strange things that people did during that time to make sure that spirits wouldn't get trapped into things and possess them or possess people, and just so many crazy things to think about now. So that was fun to do a lot of research in and pick out some interesting things to throw them into the script. So
Yeah, I think that's a great scene as well, because you can, I mean, not only, of course, in one of your opening lines in that scene when you're welcoming the guests in, but also in the setting itself, it has, you know, those details and all those elements that, you know, explicitly, like, show those superstitions kind of in action. Yeah, so I think that one was it's really nicely done. Now, I do want to ask you both probably the most popular question that we ever get asked.
What's your favorite curse word? Just kidding.
Well.
Just kidding.
Different show. Different show.
Fetch.
Have either of you actually have either of you ever felt like you experienced something strange on Huguenot Street?
I have gone out of my way for the past over 2 years to try to find something paranormal.
Okay, yeah, I know that feeling.
Because I had an obsession with it for a long time, and I'm becoming more skeptical as I get older, of course, but I've been going out of my way to try to find things creepy. I've gone into houses late at night by myself to lock up or something, and nothing has ever happened to me. I have heard stories from other people who work there, our coworkers.
Oh yeah, it's a constant thing.
That's the thing that's so interesting, so this is an interesting perspective to me. I mean, I always felt it was just because I don't spend a lot of time in the houses, and that's why I haven't had that experience either, because I also would love it, or I'm just, you know, so curious. But we do have plenty of coworkers that, I mean, unlike what you're saying, kind of almost would refuse to go into a house alone late at night.
Especially the Deo house. People get weird feelings about the Deo house. People, specifically our coworkers, have heard women singing. They hear like opera music in the background, and people talking, and they hear footsteps and things like that. I'm like, I wish I could hear that.
I enter the Deo house and I scream up the staircase. Say, "Hey, Gardy, come out! Come out and see me! Come on! Let's have a good time."
Me, Scott. You know me.
I just want to see what she's like. You know,
Yeah.
I've heard so much about you.
Seriously,
we
that is
talk
what
about
it's
her all
like.
the time. She's probably so mad at us.
Yeah.
We seriously do talk about her all the time, but it's with such respect and admiration. It's funny. Did you hear how like Kara got freaked out the other day? This is just a funny story about not paranormal, but getting freaked out anyway. So she was alone in the house, locking it up, and all of a sudden she hears all like the children laughing and like all these like footsteps and kind of like banging around and stuff. She's in the Deo house.
Oh my God.
And so she's like scared. So she flies out, right? Shuts out the lights, flies out the door, and it's literally these kids like playing on the front porch, which is, you know, a little rude because it's a historic house.
She should have known better, because there were never children living in that house for the past how many?
Oh, good point. They couldn't have been ghost children.
Over 100 years.
Exactly.
That's the big thing, the infertility curse on that house, which you'll hear about if you come to Haunted Huguenot Street.
Yes. All right, that's a good point. Yeah, she should have known better, but she sure got freaked out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, great.
That's fun. That's fun to hear.
Yeah.
I love it when
It
people
still
get freaked
happens.
out.
But I've given regular tours with a paranormal investigation team like this. I had this couple come on a regular tour, and it was last year, so we were going through the Abraham Hasbrook house, and at the end they're like, okay, so we know that you do Haunted Huguenot Street, but could you tell us a few ghost stories now? Because this is what we do. We have a whole radio show about this. And so I told them some stories, and they got really excited. They had like those, what do they call it, EVP readers. Mm-hmm. They were in the basement. I was telling a story about one of the people who lived there in the past digging up a skeleton in that basement, and they thought that it might have been a slave that was buried down there. And when I was telling that story, he said that it spiked when I said the word slave.
Wow.
So he thought that was the ghost telling him that we were on the right track.
He pressed
or something.
a button.
Probably.
We have had, you know, I mean, definitely we get contacted a lot by, you know, real paranormal investigators because they all just want to get in the Deo house.
I've given spiritual tours to people too. These young kids from on campus came on tour with me one time.
You're
and they're
probably
just like,
trolling them so hard.
I was so hard. And they didn't want to know anything about the history. They just like, can you just tell us where ghosts are? Can you actually
that's
show us like
medium.
the places that are the most haunted? I'm like, well, I can't do that myself because I'm not a medium like you, but I can bring you into the houses and you can find out for yourself. And they did. It was fun.
Wow.
Did they find
Yeah.
any?
Oh yeah, there was a lot of spiritual energy, and there were some places that they didn't even want to go to. Oh my God, there's a lot of energy over there. I just don't want to.
My first year giving the haunted tours in Abe, when I was telling all the scary stories in there, in the middle of one of the stories, I had a woman run out of the room and start to bang on the front door to get out because I locked it. And it's all those really weird colonial locks that are crazy.
Not an easy door.
No. So she was like smashing her hands on it. And I run over, I'm like, what are you doing? She's like, I need to get out. There's mystical things. And then she bolted out the door.
Mystical things.
Oh my gosh.
And I turned back to the guests and I was like, I guess
That
it worked.
was not in the script.
No.
We have mermaids in the well.
We did not pay her to do that.
Wow.
Mermaids.
Mystical things.
Good point.
Yeah,
Yeah.
unicorns on Huguenot
Her
Street, too.
unicorns. They're all over.
Ghost unicorns.
Yeah. Well, honestly, Amber, Scott, thank you both so
Thank
much
you, Caitlin.
for joining
Thanks
me.
for having
today.
us.
So much
Yeah,
fun.
I'd love to have you again. Again, tickets for Haunted Huguenot Street are available now, and these tours will sell out, so please register soon at huguenotstreet.org/haunted. We're wrapping up now, but listeners can tune in every Thursday at 7:30 p.m. for the rest of the semester at WFNP.org or 88.7 FM to hear more from Historic Huguenot Street. Thanks for listening.